Good afternoon. Hi, welcome everyone. If you can make your way towards this lovely standing area, if you don't already have a paddle, make sure to grab one from the lovely Sophia and our team over there. Because when you get to meet our genetic counselor, she's going to be testing your knowledge on genetics. Yes, grab a paddle if you don't already have one. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and for celebrating with us and welcoming Dr. Nunes to the community. A round of applause, Dr. Nunes. And a round of applause for all of you for being here. My name is Angela Lee. I am the Vice President of Administration for Cure for the Kids, and I'm thrilled to be kicking off this fantastic event with you all today. As the Director of Genetics, Genomics, and Metabolism, Dr. Nunes will see families, including children and adults with genetic disorders who previously may have to travel out of town in order to access care. And true to the Cure for the Kids DNA, we have always looked for ways to bring essential medical specialty care to the community. Historically, for pediatric patients with genetic specialty needs, care has only really been available on a limited cash pay type of basis. And so we're so proud today to announce that we have brought a full-time family geneticist here to this beautiful place we all call home. And Cure for the Kids will continue to look for ways, of course, to expand care in the field of rare diseases for pediatric and adult patients. Dr. Nunes, along with our first genetic counselor, Amber Schreiber, will and have already actually started seeing internal patients already. And we are focusing on finalizing our internal workflow so that we can start to, of course, see external patients to come hopefully in the next few short months. But really, we can't do this alone. I really appreciate all of you for being here. Every one of you here play an integral part of our healthcare system, which is beautiful and sometimes complicated. And we need all of you to build a meaningful genetics program here in the community. And so whether you're a pediatrician, a specialist, a payer, a nonprofit, a pharmaceutical company, or a genetic testing company, we really are looking to each and every one of you for the opportunity to collaborate so we can supercharge this program and start making a difference here in Nevada. Before we welcome Dr. Nunes to the stage, please join me in welcoming Dr. Joseph Lasky, our Chief Medical Officer, who will speak about the insights and synergy genetics will bring to the medical community here in our state. Thank you.
I was like, that's not me. Oh, that's me. Okay. I'm not dressed as... I don't know about that. Anyway, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Joseph Lasky. I'm the medical director here at Cure for the Kids, and I'm incredibly proud and honored to be able to introduce Dr. Mark Nunes and Amber Schreiber, our board-certified geneticist and genetic counselor, both of whom have joined the team here at Cure for the Kids Foundation. I will let them both speak shortly regarding kind of their personal biographies and training, but I did want to say a few words about the importance of being able to bring additional genetic services to the state of Nevada. As many of you know, the mission of Cure for the Kids is advancing cures and prevention of childhood cancer and other rare diseases. I think another way to think about what we do is what happens when the parent brings their child into the pediatrician and says, something is wrong with my child, please help. or even an adult with a possible rare disease says something is wrong, no one else can figure it out, please help. All of the pediatric and adult subspecialists in this room are here to listen to that patient and family with compassion and humility and to figure out how to provide that help. Sometimes we have to bring out some serious grit and determination to get the appropriate testing done, whether that is scans or genetic testing. Having Dr. Nunes and Amber here at Cure for the Kids is going to further help us in our mission to providing the absolute best care for our patients and give them the help they need to allow their children with cancer and persons with rare genetic diseases to not just live, but to thrive and to achieve their dreams. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Nunes and Amber.
Thank you, Dr. Lasky, and thank you for this marvelous welcome to the Las Vegas community. I really look forward to working with all of you. So, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I want to tell you about what will be different with respect to genetics at Cure for the Kids. And I want to kind of give you a couple of granular examples on how we all can work together as a team. But before I dive too deeply into my remarks, I want to give a shout out to Nicola Longo, who's the founding geneticist at Cure for the Kids. Literally came on board to help with our infusions for children and adults with lysosomal storage disorders, and continues a commitment to this organization. And so he's one of the giants upon whose shoulders I stand. So thank you, Dr. Longo, in absentia. So my story, I was born in the shadow of this cathedral, Ely Cathedral, 17 miles from Cambridge, England, to a U.S. serviceman from Hawaii and the base librarian. My dad never read a book in his life, but he did marry the base librarian. I grew up in California and Hawaii, and I went to UC Davis as an undergraduate, and I studied population genetics, not knowing that I would end up doing clinical genetics in my career. I went to the Service Academy of Medical Schools, Uniformed Services University in Bethesda, Maryland. I had Tony Fauci come over and give us talks on immunology. I had a really great education in the 10th graduating class at that institution. And in paying back my active duty service commitment, I was a clinical geneticist, and I was the director of the United States Air Force Molecular Diagnostic Laboratory at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, where I lived for 7 years of my life. I was an expert in genetic diagnoses confused with child abuse, and so I actually did a forensic pediatrics fellowship before they offered a board in it, and then went on to Ohio State University and Nationwide Children's Hospital, where I co-directed a metabolic bone clinic and was a clinical geneticist there for 3 years. Then Kaiser in San Diego made me an offer I just couldn't refuse. So I spent almost 15 years of my career at Kaiser in San Diego as the director of genetic services in the biggest service area in Southern California, Kaiser. So we went from 400,000 beneficiaries to 600,000 over the course of my 14 years at Kaiser. They let me play at Rady Children's Hospital and lecture and teach the residents and participate in the genetics fellowship program. I was on the faculty at the School of Medicine teaching medical students and really had a great run there. I have the privilege of being a bonehead, working with metabolic bone diseases and being an expert in a number of them, including a very rare condition, hypophosphatasia. And I've worked with patient support organizations like Hypophosphatase Europe and Soft Bones, who will be holding their patient meeting here in Las Vegas in 2026. And during my time in the Kaiser, I really had this fantastic opportunity to build. So I was the first Kaiser doctor to use cell-free fetal DNA for prenatal diagnosis, and so we call that testing non-invasive prenatal screening, or NIPT. And I piloted the program in San Diego to introduce that technology. I was the lead agent in introducing the technology into our Southern California group with 4.5 million beneficiaries, into the California 2 groups with 9 million beneficiaries, and then Kaiser nationwide. So that was a fun ride and a fantastic experience. I also was able to introduce, was the co-chair for introducing whole exome sequencing into the Kaiser system. It was discovered at my alma mater for genetics, Seattle Children's Hospital, University of Washington Healthcare System, where I did my genetics fellowship. I'd like to be at the cutting edge, so as I took the early separation from Kaiser, I wanted to go places where I could make a difference, teach a little bit, have some fun, but in particular I wanted to make a difference, and so I stayed at the cutting edge, and so at Valley Children's Hospital, where I spent the past 2 years, I was one of the early adapters, and we were one of four institutions in the United States participating in prenatal whole genome sequencing, so a Columbia University project, and so I felt like I was staying at the cutting edge there. So what's going to happen with genetics at Cure for the Kids? I'm a different provider than Dr. Longo. I think one of the messages that I've put out there, and my thanks to leadership in understanding this the first time they heard this, it's absolutely fantastic. We're not going to see patients at Cure for the Kids in genetics. We're going to see families. We're going to see families. So I call that trios, and again, leadership got this right off the bat. And it makes sense. If I have a child with osteosarcoma, a cancer that's caused by mutations in a gene called P53, there's a fairly good chance that one or the other parent is going to have that genetic change and they're going to be at risk for cancer themselves. And I'm not doing that child any favor if I don't address the parent's genetic issues as well. If I have a child with a bleeding disorder, one parent or the other is going to be a carrier for that condition. And so for their reproductive health management, it's really important that those parents become my patient as well. Now, I'm not going to do that by myself. We have fantastic prenatal genetic counselors at the High Risk Pregnancy Center and Desert Perinatal that are doing the heavy lifting with regard to this work. But I really want to cooperate and work with this community in taking care of trios. And again, thanks to leadership for understanding this from the very first moment that I described it to them. The second initiative I think that I'm interested in is making sure that every kid at Cure for the Kids walking through the door will have a 3-generation pedigree that addresses the precision medicine objectives of the Centers for Disease Control. So the Centers of Disease Control looked at all the things that you could do genetic testing for and picked 3 things that they thought were really important to test for. So one of them was hereditary breast and ovarian cancer, so individuals that have breast cancer or ovarian cancer less than 45 years of age, about 1 out of 200 people in the population. Hereditary colon cancer, about 1% of individuals in the family, and familial hypercholesterolemia, about 1 out of 250 people in the population have familial hypercholesterolemia. You add that up, that's 1.75%. You do a pedigree with a mom and a dad, you look at the trio, 3% of the time we're going to have a parent that has one of those conditions. And the way that we get at that is by taking this 3-generation pedigree. So we'll be piloting that in genetics. We will move on into our hematologists and cancer predisposition clinics and introduce the pedigrees there. Dr. Lasky wants this to become the standard of care within the next couple of years at Cure for the Kids. My pediatric specialty colleagues that I'll be working with, we hope to make this the standard of care in your practice as well and want to build the community in order to support that. And when we finally have that freestanding children's hospital here in Las Vegas, a few years down the road, I hope that the standard is that every child that walks through the door has a 3-generation pedigree. So this is going to take building a genetics community. The genetics community, we've already talked about the trio and how important the trio is as the basis of that. And moving beyond the trio, each of those parents is part of a trio as well, and so that's a community. We call that cascade testing in genetics, in trying to kind of trace and follow and care for those families. And our genetic counselors and genetic counseling assistants can do great work for us in helping families with rare diseases. But there also are cultures that you have to be sensitive to as well in building that community. And so we're really thrilled that nonprofits, volunteers, other organizations are long partnered with Cure for the Kids and can help us to reach out to communities that need our services. So building that genetics community, I like to kind of visualize it as the trio being at the center, and their primary care doctor, whether it be a pediatrician, an internist, or a family practice doctor, is right there in the scrum with us, kind of trying to explain what's going on for those families. And we will, the genetics team will be comprised of right now one MD, hopefully a few more over the next couple of years, several genetic counselors, both within Cure for the Kids and out of Cure for the Kids, and genetic counseling assistants. And our job is interpreting the arcane. So we have this weird genetic world. You've got these double helices at the dioramas at the table, and kind of interpreting those purines and pyrimidines and the patterns that they make and the words that they spell is a daunting task. And so our job for the families is interpreting that arcane world. Our job, working with the other members of the team, the maternal fetal medicine specialist, hematology oncology here at Cure for the Kids, the NICU, cardiology, the community organization, community resources, state screening programs with the Department of Health. Our job is also interpreting that arcane world for those members of our genetics community as well. So we'll be reaching out to all of you and asking you to kind of join us in this endeavor. So I guess we'll start the quiz now. The knowledge, I think, you don't have to use your paddle for this. Does anybody happen to know who this woman is? Rosalind Franklin, I'm hearing, so you're really fantastic. So I bring up Rosalind Franklin because this woman, her X-ray crystallography described that double helix that you're looking at the tables. So it was her work. If she hadn't died of ovarian cancer when she was 38, she certainly could have earned the Nobel Prize for discovering the DNA molecule. She also did fantastic work in virology and capsids for viruses, if you know what that is, and could have earned a Nobel Prize for that, and also could have been earned Nobel Prizes in chemistry for X-ray crystallography and other areas. She died of ovarian cancer when she was 38, which 75 years after she passed away is something that we can detect now with our precision medicine pedigrees and our family histories that suggest hereditary breast and ovarian cancer. She had hereditary breast and ovarian cancer. So I raise her as an example of the idea that we're talking about with regard to precision medicine pedigrees. And also, I think that there are unrecognized individuals that need genetic services and genetic help, unrecognized communities. I think Rosalind Franklin also represents that. So in addition to being a fantastic woman whose shoulders I stand on, she's also an inspiration to all of us. So with that, I'd like to introduce a member of this team that we're building with you, the community, Amber Schreiber, who is a fantastic genetic counselor from right here in Las Vegas, born and raised. She is a collegiate athlete. So she was a collegiate soccer player at Kansas Wesleyan University, and she attended the Keck Genetic Counseling Master's Program in Claremont, California. So I'm really thrilled to have this be my first partner in genetics, and I'll let you tell her a little bit about genetic counselors. So Amber, come on.
Thank you, Dr. Nunes, and thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I'm really nervous right now. so bear with me. So I just want to start by saying a little something about myself. Dr. Nunes did a great job introducing me, but I am born and raised in Las Vegas. It was always the plan to come back. I left only to pursue my education, and yes, I did play soccer. I also want to highlight, it was not my idea to talk about that tonight. Dr. Nunes was really excited about that, even asked for a photo. So that's me in college, everybody. And then yes, I went straight to pursue my master's at KGI in Southern California, but I wasn't sure if I was gonna have the opportunity to come back home, given how sparse genetic services and healthcare in general is here. It truly is a desert. So to have the opportunity to come back home, be with my family, and to actually serve my community, I wasn't sure if I was gonna get to have the opportunity, and now that I'm here, it's amazing and surreal. So thank you all for having me. Okay, so let's play our game. Let's do something fun. Everybody, if you have your paddles, we're gonna play fact or fiction. It's really just true or false. I'm gonna read off some statements here, and I want you to give me a thumbs up if you think it's fact or true, and give me a thumbs down if you think it's fiction or false. So our first statement here is genetic counselors are a type of doctor. Is that true or false? Fact or fiction? I'm seeing a lot of thumbs down. Good job. Yes. Fiction. I am not a doctor, and genetic counselors are not doctors. We don't have medical degrees, but we have a different degree we'll talk about later. Next, genetic counselors, we interpret genetic test results. True or false? Yes, that is fact. We are trained to do so. Our next statement here is genetic counselors, we assess risk of genetic disease. And thumbs up again. Yes, that is true. Yes, we do. Our last statement here is genetic counselors provide treatment for patients with genetic conditions. True or false? Okay, I'm seeing a couple of different answers, but mostly thumbs down, and it's thumbs down. Dr. Nunes said that I tricked him earlier, so I just want to clarify that we do talk about treatment. Cure for the Kids will be able to hopefully provide some good treatment, but genetic counselors ourselves will not be the ones on that order. We don't have medical degrees. So that was just a little icebreaker here to introduce genetic counseling. And really what I have here is who are we? What are we doing here, and why am I here? Genetic counselors, we are actually part of the healthcare team, and we have advanced training in both medical genetics and psychosocial counseling. And what that does is that allows us to guide and support patients basically from start to finish on their genetics journey, whether that includes genetic testing or not. And so the way that I like to think about what a genetic counselor is, or what my job is illustrated by this picture right here. Does anybody know what this picture is, this animal? Any guesses? So this is a liger. This is a beautiful animal, beautiful hybrid animal of a lion and a tiger. And that's kind of what genetic counselors are. We are a beautiful blend of both medical genetics and our science brains, as well as the emotional counseling, psychosocial side of our job. So this here is, really what is the difference between genetic counselors and geneticists. And I have here a lovely Venn diagram. As you can see, there's quite a bit of overlap. We definitely have different scopes of practice. We have different degrees. I have a master's degree. Obviously, geneticists have a doctorate degree or medical degree. And we have some specialized training as well. Like I mentioned earlier, we have specific training in the counseling aspect. And really, what a genetic counselor's role, in addition to everything that we do with our geneticists and with our healthcare team, is to focus on the patient's not just physical well-being, but also emotional well-being. A lot of stuff comes up when we talk about genetics. A lot of sensitive information comes up when we talk about families and genetic testing, and to have somebody there that really understands what's going on from the science perspective, but also can be there for you to support and tell you where we might go next. Another big thing that genetic counselors focus on is decision making, making sure that patients have that autonomy and that informed consent piece of it. And of course, again, I just listed out some other things that we share as responsibilities. We do a lot of education, both genetic counselors and geneticists alike, and really just able to care for patients in the way that is needed. Now, here at C4K, it's not on there, but here at C4K, there's a lot of questions actually in the community, what's the difference between a genetic counselor, geneticist, GC versus geneticist, but here at C4K we're going to be a team. It's going to be GC and geneticist. And so that was just a little genetic counseling 101 of really what I'm here to do. And I really hope to make some great things happen here. And I really appreciate you all for welcoming me back home with open arms.
So thank you for welcoming Amber. I do have to tell this story from her interview. So Dr. Lasky and I were sitting across from Amber, and she's kind of, do you have any questions for us? And she said, well, yeah. Do you guys like Las Vegas? Are you going to stay here? So she was kind of sussing out whether we were committed to Las Vegas. And so this young lady is here to stay, and I hope that she has a long career at Cure for the Kids. So thanks again, Amber. So I wanted to give two granular examples of what this genetics community team potentially needs to take care of patients and families with genetic diagnoses. So this is the Marfan syndrome. Many of you have heard about this. Somebody was telling me, didn't Abraham Lincoln have the Marfan syndrome? That's what most people may know about the diagnosis. But interestingly enough, half of the cases are new autosomal dominant mutations, and about half of the cases that we see in our genetics clinic inherit the disorder from an affected parent. So remember the trio. So we're seeing families. About half the time I need to evaluate a parent. So for the payers out there and the health plans out there, we really need your cooperation when we are turning in a bill for a trio. It's not a coincidence or a mistake or low yield when we want to evaluate that tall, lanky father who has a child with Marfan syndrome. We need to take care of that person as well. They're part of the trios that we're seeing here. There are a trio of findings that we see with this diagnosis, ectopia lentis, or dislocation of the lens, the body shape that you hear, very long arms in proportion to the body, very long, slender fingers. We call it arachnodactyly, spider fingers. We discovered the gene for this in the 1990s, fibrillin-1, and then Hal Dietz at Johns Hopkins University discovered the TGF-beta signaling pathway that's responsible for other forms of aortic root dissection. Why do we care about this? Well, what happens is that in the aorta, at the base of where the valves are, is a weak point, and in individuals with the Marfan syndrome, there's false tracking up into the wall of the blood vessel, and it cuts off the circulation to the coronary arteries. And so the aorta doesn't actually burst. It's actually a massive heart attack that individuals with this diagnosis die from. So there have been some famous people that have had the diagnosis. So Flo Hyman was an Olympic volleyball player in the 1980s, who many of us could diagnose from, the TV screen. But died of aortic dissection. Jonathan Larson, the producer of Rent, died producing the previews at the La Jolla Playhouse in San Diego with this diagnosis as well. So we want to avoid that complication if we can. And my colleague Hal Dietz, when he discovered the TGF-beta signaling pathway, and this is a true story, he Googled TGF-beta antagonist. And he came up with, he says he Googled it, and he came up with losartan, a medication that's used for hypertension and has a very low side effect profile. So what you can see at the top band here is the Marfan mouse model in Hal Dietz's lab. And on the bottom row, you can see, from normal going to aortic root dilatation to being on propranolol and still going on to aortic root dilatation. And in mice that are treated with losartan, the aorta stays the normal size. So we evolved and validated that in growing aortas, losartan is the medication of choice, and in adults with Marfan-related diagnosis, that propranolol is the medication of choice. And that was finally validated 30 years after the hypothesis had first been put out there to put individuals with the Marfan syndrome on beta blockers. So a diagnosis that nobody thought there would be therapy or treatment when I was in medical school or even when I was training in medical genetics is it now has a reasonable therapy and treatment, and we just need to get the right patients into that treatment. Now, it's a nightmare for pediatricians, tall, lanky, basketball and volleyball playing, athletes, that they want to rule out Marfan syndrome. And the diagnostic criteria have been codified for quite some time, and are now encapsulated in the Marfan systemic score. And you don't need to be a geneticist to be able to do this. You have to be able to measure an upper segment to lower segment ratio and look at a number of physical features. Now, if you send me all the patients in Las Vegas to rule out Marfan syndrome, I will burn out in 6 months and I'll run away to retirement. So we need to kind of come up with a program together on how we work with primary care providers, pediatricians, to provide that care. So there are a couple of different ways, that we're going to be providing care for individuals with the Marfan syndrome and other rare diseases. So of course we're going, the clinic is not quite open, but we're going to be opening our Cure for the Kids genetics clinic, and patients will see a genetic counselor, myself, or we'll see both the genetic counselor and myself. We will be using telemedicine, to work with some patients, particularly patients that have a little bit of a longer drive to get into Las Vegas. And so I'm very conscious of the sacrifices that families make to receive genetic care. In the NICU, neonatal Marfan syndrome, you don't have to be any geneticist to recognize that. The neonatologist recognized the long spidery fingers right away. It's a different animal. It's not inherited in families. But we need to figure out how to work with our NICUs, because likewise, if I'm on call for the 6 area NICUs in Las Vegas, which I just learned today, if I'm on call for that group, I also am going to burn out in 6 months and go running back into retirement. So I think that, and then finally, there's a team approach. So the team approach, again, has the trio at the center of it, and then is using our geneticists, using our cardiologists, using our orthopedic doctors, using our primary care doctors, interacting with patient support organizations like the Marfan Foundation, to kind of provide that multidisciplinary experience. This can be done virtually, so it doesn't have to be a freestanding clinic where all of those specialists come together. It does require a case conference and case managers to kind of come forward and manage that population. And so partnering with the health plans and the payers and the hospitals in the area to kind of provide those case managers, I think, is really super important, because it's a team approach again. This is part of our genetics community. We could do it freestanding, and I will point out that at Cure for the Kids that we have orthopedics, genetics, physical therapy, social work, and we have Dr. Joshi's ultrasound machine that can be used to do heart ultrasound. So we've got almost the entire components of this clinic if anybody wants to sponsor it for us. So I'll kind of move along at this point. And we'll continue to talk a little bit about Marfan syndrome. So again, it doesn't take a genetic test to test for the Marfan syndrome. So the first human genome was this, a karyotype or a chromosome study. You couldn't diagnose Marfan syndrome with a chromosome test, but you could diagnose something in the differential diagnosis for this, which is Klinefelter syndrome. So a lot of individuals, males with an extra X chromosome, have a body shape that looks a lot like the Marfan syndrome. So this test could kind of help you with the differential diagnosis. The next tier that's been in place for roughly the past 16 years or so is cytogenetic microarray. So this test looks for missing or extra pieces of genetic information. So what's shown on this slide is it sends out millions of probes to the DNA and looks for missing or extra genetic information. So this upper slide shows missing information on chromosome 7. This bottom slide shows extra information on chromosome 11. Another entity in the differential diagnosis for the Marfan syndrome, 22q deletion syndrome, also can be detected by the cytogenetic microarray technology. So we're getting a little bit better. The second-tier testing, usually a geneticist is involved in this, but the first part of the second-tier testing, often our cardiologists are involved in this, and Julia Prinzi at the Children's Heart Center of Nevada certainly is involved in doing a lot of genetic testing for individuals and rule out Marfan syndrome. Our next generation sequencing, where we're looking at a dozen or so genes that can be associated with aortic dissection and doing that genetic test. If we don't find the answer, usually a geneticist or a specialized genetic counselor is involved in the next tier, which is whole exome sequencing. We're sequencing the expressed regions of 96 to 97% of all the genes in the human genome, about 1% of all of our DNA total. And then if that doesn't find the answer, very rarely we go on to whole genome sequencing, which sequences all of the genetic information, all 3 billion base pairs of DNA inherited from mother and father. So that's kind of our second tier testing. Now, to move on to our second diagnosis, this is a child with minor dysmorphology when they're younger, but as they get older, they start to look a little Marfanoid. They have a wide space between their eyes. We call that hypertelorism. And when you look at the bell hanging down at the back of their throat, they have a bifid uvula. So it's a split uvula. And this is that guy, Hal Dietz, that kind of found the losartan answer. This is the syndrome that's named after him, Louis-Dietz syndrome. And a lot of these individuals have intellectual disability. They tend to have mild to moderate intellectual disability, or they fall in the autistic spectrum. So another category of patient that we see quite frequently, and again, I'll go running away from Las Vegas if all of them get referred to me, but I'm already learning some of the partners that I'll be able to work with as part of the genetics community here, is our genetic testing for intellectual disability and autism. And for the NICU, our genetic testing for kids that have 2 or more major malformations that are unrelated to each other. So when I do that cytogenetic microarray test in that population, about 15 to 20% of the time I'll find a microdeletion or microduplication that explains what's going on with that child. Now, we're moving beyond that. We're moving towards a one test. So when I do that advanced technology, that whole exome sequencing the expressed regions of the genome, my diagnostic yield goes from 15 to 20% up to 35% for individuals with intellectual disability, autism, and multiple congenital anomalies. And when I do whole genome sequencing, the diagnostic yield goes up to 45%. So payers, health plans, when we are, if I do 2 panels, genetic panels, that costs the same as whole exome sequencing. So please, we're working on trying to get state reimbursement and Medicaid reimbursement for doing this higher level test, but we're moving towards this being the first tier testing. I don't expect a developmental pediatrician or neurologist to be ordering whole exome sequencing in all of these cases. We will support them when they do and helping interpret the variants that we kind of get back on the testing. We improve the yield of the testing greatly if we do it in a trio. We test the child, mother, and father. So again, payers, when we ask for testing in the parents, we're doing it for a reason because it helps us to interpret the test results. So this endeavor that we're talking about, building a cure for the kids, is an endeavor that we seek to build on the existing genetics community. As I said, there are already great genetic counselors in the community that are doing fantastic, great work. We want to start cooperating. We want to broaden the net. We want to talk. We want to have lots of conferences. We're happy to do virtual case conferences in your pediatric specialty. We're happy to work things out. So I'll finish up with why I'm here. So I told you some of the things that I would like to do, but at the end of the day, the teens were this great diagnosis, decade of the diagnostic odyssey. So again, we went from a 15% diagnostic yield for multiple congenital anomalies to tripling that to 45% diagnostic yield in those circumstances. So that's fantastic. We still have a lot to learn. We still have to kind of get that 50% for things that we know are genetic. Not everything is genetic. So still a lot to learn there, but we are now in the decade of treating genetic diagnoses. And I can think of no better place to be as I look at the patients and families that I've cared for and worked so hard to diagnose. to start to translate that into treating their genetic diagnoses, whether it's Marfan syndrome, Pompe disease, X-linked hypophosphatemic rickets, or any number of other rare diseases that are cared for here at Cure for the Kids. I can think of no better place to kind of enter into this decade of treating genetic diagnosis than Cure for the Kids. So thank you for inviting me to Las Vegas. Thank you for inviting me into your community. Very nice to meet you all.